Hey guys. So last week I was spending time with God and I was doing a discipline that Scott Ford, who used to be the CEO of Alltel, introduced me to called heat mapping, where basically you invite the Holy Spirit to kind of unpack your life to where you write out everything that's on your mind, every project, every person, just everything that's going on. And then you just ask Him to give clarity as far as like what you need to focus on and what you need to be doing. And so I was praying through 412 and just writing out the different roles that God has called me specifically to play. And some of the ones I kind of knew. I mean, yes, God's calling me to pastor, especially you guys, um, and just calling me in different areas. But then one word came out that I wasn't expecting, but was really cool. And it was just the word stories. And there was something that God was just confirming in my heart that I was supposed to find, capture, convey, speak, like stories were supposed to be a big part of what God was calling me to do with 412 in the coming months and years. And so it's kind of interesting because after God showed me that, I was just doing what I normally do, which is interact with parents as they're dropping kids off. And just as I was doing that, one of the parents, I just said, "Hey, how are you guys?" Just a real simple question, ask it all the time. And she goes, "Wow, it's amazing that you asked that today." I said, "Okay, well, what do you mean?" And she just began telling me a story of her sixth grade daughter and just something that had come out while they were driving to church that day. She began to tell me how her sixth grade daughter had been experiencing people at church, I mean, not church, but at school, like calling her gay and just making fun of her and speaking these identity terms up on her. And her mom said, "Well, how are you dealing with that? How are you handling it?" And her response was so cool. And as this mom was telling me, the thing you need to understand is this mom, like, is near tears as she's telling me this. I mean, we're in a busy hallway, people are walking back and forth, and this mom's near tears as she tells me, as she just begins to explain that her daughter said, "Well, mom," she said, it doesn't matter what they say about me. It doesn't matter who they say that I am, because I know that I'm a daughter of the King. I mean, I know that no matter what people say about me, that that's who I really am, that I'm a daughter of God." And just to see her excitement that her daughter got it, and then just to know that identity was definitely one of those words that God spoke to me as I was praying over 412 as well, that we're called to build identity into these students. Like, that was huge. Just that, number one, those stories confirm that we're winning. I mean, because I want to know that we're accomplishing the task that God has called us to. And so to hear a parent tell a story of a student um, that is speaking from her God identity into and against what the world is speaking about her, like, that's a win. And that's a story that we need to celebrate. That's a story that we need to share. That's a story that we need to write down as a record of what God is doing in our midst. And so if you're a journaler, I want you to stop and pause it right now, because there's something I want to tell you, a couple things I want you to write down that I think are huge about stories. And so this is it. The first thing is, again, remember and record the stories that we hear. And so, just like I'm sharing this story with you guys, we need to be writing them down, remembering them, recording them, because God is a God who is writing his story. God is a God who is making a name for himself, and the way that he does it is through story, by accomplishing these amazing things, by performing these amazing deeds. And then our responsibility is to remember them, to record them, and to retell them. And so we just need to get really good at that. And so as you're hearing stories, especially these stories of identity, stories of worship, if there's a student that's just engaging in worship, like one time a couple of weeks ago, we were worshiping, and we're doing video worship in the 412 room in Little Rock, and I look, and there's a few people who are just completely disengaged, but when I looked, there was this back row, and it was just this back row of seventh grade boys. and their hands were lifted, their hearts were engaged, and they were just pouring out worship to God. And I loved it, and I was amazed by it, and I celebrated it because seventh grade boys, for them to worship, that's amazing. I mean, that is a miracle of God. And again, it just shows how He's working in the hearts of students. So, stories of identity, stories of worship, stories of salvation, stories of connection, just isolated students finding friends and finding connection. Those are stories we want to tell. Stories of service. Like if there's a student in need and somehow needs are met, whether it's through your leaders or through your kids, that's a story that we need to remember. That's a story that you need to retell. It's a story that you need to record. And so as you're hearing these stories, and again, write these words down: stories of identity, stories of worship, stories of connection, stories of service. These are the stories that that I want to hear. And so as these are happening, please email them, please text them, because I want to know these stories because it's a testimony of what God is doing. So that's the first thing. Remember, record, retell significant stories. And again, go back if you don't remember the list. The other thing is this: kids won't tell you stories, but parents will, and small group leaders will. Like, that's the thing that, I mean, because the funny thing is after talking to this mom, I went to the student because I wanted to hear her side of the story. And so I asked her, I was like, hey, girl, because it was a girl. I really didn't say, hey, girl, like that, because that really was weird. But I used her name and I said, hey, what's been going on at school? Like, I was clueless. Like, I didn't know what had been happening. And the funny thing is that her response was, oh, nothing, just stuff. And the more I learn about this age group, the more I realize that that's normal. That, one of the biggest complaints that parents have about 412 is, man, my kids can't tell me what happened. Well, that's not because of 412. That's because your kid's a fifth, sixth, seventh grader, and they don't know what's going on. And so if we want to find out what God's doing, if we want to find out the stories of what God is accomplishing in the lives of these students, we have to have a dialogue with these parents. We have to have a dialogue with these parents because they're the ones that are going to see what God is doing in the lives of the students, and they're going to be the ones, if you have a relationship with them, who's going to share that with you. And when you can hear the stories of what God's doing, you can realize that what you're doing here is significant, is super significant. And so again, here stories, I'm just beginning to realize how important that's going to be in my role. That I need to find out the stories that are happening across the state, that I need to share the stories that are happening across the state. And so you can almost expect that every email, I'm going to want to be sharing a story of what God is doing in a 412 student across the state. But the only way that I'm going to be able to pull that off is if you are remembering, recording, and retelling those stories. And again, the only way that you're really going to hear the stories is if you have a dialogue with the parents, because they're the ones who can tell you what's really happening. So again, love you guys. Believe in what you're doing. Had a great time hanging out with Amanda Johnson and her crew in Russellville this weekend. And man, she is killing it. And so if you get a chance to talk to her, pick her brain about how to recruit leaders. Because the crazy thing is that their weekend service, Russellville's running about one leader for every 4 to 5 students. Just let that sink in for a moment because that is mind-blowing. So Amanda, you're doing a great job in Russellville. Guys, learn from her because she has done ministry for 30 years and she can help you get better. I promise you. So love you guys. Talk to you later.